Greetings, everybody. Welcome to this meditation study, encouraging research and Bible study, personal Bible study, and using the Bible tools that are out there to kind of follow through on words, finding out original words, looking for context, asking God for wisdom, sending the Holy Spirit to pull together understanding for these last days. Many things, many situations, much delusion, and a great flood of perception and narrative is being put out in these last days. So, how can you know the truth? How can you know how to guide your ship? How can you navigate through these last days? How can you hear from God? Well, there are so many voices out there. And this is what's important. So we're going to spend some time in Daniel 11, which I believe is going to bring special significance. Daniel 11 and 12, that's all built up from all of Daniel. And I think we're going to look into some pretty cool stuff. What we're going to do is do just a tiny bit of reorientation because I think it's good to inculcate, to go over a fraction of what we've learned before, to build on it because we're moving forward. Hey, Karen, good to see you. So I want you guys to just do a quick, we're going to do a kind of a quick small review, and then we're going to jump into actually going through and reading a large part of Daniel 11. And we could see that what we've learned in the previous studies will give us insight into, hey, Steve, good to see you both, into some perspective that'll help us unpack some of Daniel 11. The other part is as we're going to spend continued time on Daniel 11 because we're also going to also spend some time through the Kings and Chronicles and see the parallel between kings of the north, kings of the south, and God has already given us inspired history. God has infinite foresight, knowing that we're going to need a lot of context and detail. Hey, Vincent, good to see you. A lot of context and biblical context, not just current events or in kind of a piecemealed history, but in biblical history, we could basically allow the transparencies to overlay and we'll get a full 3D picture. It's really cool how the Bible is written out. It really is very robust. It's very holographic 3D if you really want to look at it because God layers the thing and then you could see in many different angles. You go, oh wow, King of the North, King of the South is not a new novel thing. And the concept between North Wind and South Wind is not a novel thing. And the idea of a um, you get this picture in Daniel that it keeps building up, telling you the same thing over and over again, not different things, but it just keeps building you up in details. And so we're going to continue to look at that. And then Revelation picks up on this imagery, and all the prophets kind of pick up on these imageries. That's important to understand. So we're going to look at Revelation 13, the significance of the two beasts. You have the mythical beast, and then you have the lamb-like beast coming from the land. And you'll see that this is running parallel to what we talked about a little bit in Job, that you had Leviathan, a sea beast, and then you had the land beast of Behemoth. And the connection of Behemoth, the land beast, to the Re'em, to King James says unicorn, but if you look, it's plural horns. It's a two-horned lamb-like beast that grows up into a mega bison buffalo kind of a picture, as you'll see. So we're going to continue to build up into these two powers at the end of time. You're going to get a global Catholic false Christianity, and then you're going to get, unfortunately, one beast that was mightily used of God, a ram, a southern king picture of a Persian or a Cyrus type beast that is clearly identified as Protestantism that really found its footing and foothold in the United States and brought the gospel to the rest of the world and then became a hegemonic power and then will run in a collision to globalism and then will become a strange bedfellow with that power. And then you'll know that's the end of time. And we're going to look into the possibility of some of that picture playing itself out in Daniel chapter 11. So let's get into this. Revelation 13, just a little background. They're going to jump right into Daniel chapter 11 and 12. It says, And the beast that I saw resembled a leopard. We knew that that was the Grecian beast, the leopard that can't change its spots, right? The defiled beast that is very well camouflaged. And but it is, quote, has leopardcy. Okay, it's a stained garment. His feet were like those of a bear, and you'll see that that is the this was the Grecian picture. This was the Persian picture, and so there's a kind of a reset at the end of time in Daniel chapter 8. Is you will see that the two beasts now correlate that to both Persia and Greece will also now correlate to two atonement beasts, in which we're going to look at these beasts on the Day of Atonement, where you have 1798, 1844, and then you have the 20th century and the world wars. And you have this parallel of God running an atonement in heaven and the proclamation of the three angels' message to make a declaration of that everlasting gospel of Christ going into the Holy of Holies to marry his bride and moving into his work in a what's called a Moyed Getz, a last day, a trumpet slash atonement picture to bring about the Feast of Tabernacles. In other words, he comes in the clouds of glory and he brings us new garments and he raises us from the grave. So our mortality puts on immortality and our corruption puts on incorruption. And these are our new tabernacles. So God is bringing us through these trumpets of the 10 commandments. And then you'll have the Day of Atonement of his high priestly mediation, affliction, repentance, sin offering, preparation for the bridegroom. The beast that I saw resembled a leopard. His feet were like those of a bear. His mouth was that of a lion. So you're going to see the rolling up of all of these characteristics come together at the end of time. And the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. That we know that Satan is backing up this Daniel 2 image. And the dragon, who is Satan, this is commentary from Amplified, stands at the head of an unholy idolatrous trinity, comprised also of the first beast, who is, quote, Antichrist. In other words, you're going to see that the Roman Catholic system is running a parallel to the concept of Babylon. It has healed a wound, and you saw that with the 1260-year day prophecy, in which it ran into a collision where from 538, when the Justinian Code joined the Roman Catholic Church with the Roman secular civil power and became a force for 1260 years that we call medievalism, or that we call the Dark Ages. And it was a counterfeit Christianity that brought a great summertime, a great heat and desolation to the Church of God, in which God had to maintain a remnant throughout that 1260-year process. And then you had, of course, 1798, 1260 years after 538. And then you had, of course, Napoleon now defuncting the Pope. And then now Protestantism, that was birthed out of the late, right around the 15th, 16th century. And it was finally reaching its maturity. And there was a ring of liberty through Europe and the rest of the world. And fundamentally, the United States became an atonement beast, a place in which the declaration of Christ entering into the Holy of Holies and the great proclamation and loud cry to the rest of the world that Christ is preparing to come to the world. And you had the first and second Great Awakening, and this lamb-like beast that became a power for liberty, both civil liberty and religious liberty to the world. So that was the deadly wound. Well, that wound gets healed right around the time of the beginning of the 20th century, when you had the threefold idea of socialism, communism, and fascism, which was really a ruse, as we've gone through, for repackaging medievalism, right? So that's what you had, is you had this kind of rebranding of medievalism, and then it took world wars to bring that about. World War I didn't fully accomplish it. You had a second world war, and then now you have the war on terror, which is the third world war that's only escalating, and it's an endless war. So that wound was healed. Rome has her power back, and she definitely has her tentacles in all these globalist powers that you see surrounding the Protestant beast, which is America. And that Protestant lamb-like beast, you're going to see goes to war with this globalist power, and then you're going to see the defeat ultimately of this king of the South, this ram beast. And the second beast was Lamblike, who is the false prophet. And you have an apostate Christianity. You see it in Pentecostalism. You see the apostate Christianity in the idea that it is a dominion theology, just like Rome, that believes the kingdom of God is on earth, not understanding that has to do with righteousness and atonement and a priestcraft of the ministration of Christ in heaven. And it brings everything to this kind of globalist idea of a pseudo quasi Christianity. And you could rightly call it socialism, an American, quote, version of having its dominion in the world mimics Rome. That's what Rome did in medievalism. Now this is neo-medievalism, right? So this is now America is basically doing what Rome used to do in this century and in the last century after the world wars. And then that's what Rome was doing, creating a Christian hegemony, a Christ-like democratic system in which you will see the Greco-Roman influence all over the world. And there was this desire to unseat powers and by intrigue and subversion and the creation of revolutions, et cetera, to overturn these governments. That's old medieval Roman tricks that our CIA and et cetera, the kind of powers that are nebulous all over the world, is duplicating that of Rome. And so now we've kind of taken a quasi-Christianity, which is a socialism that came out of America. The apostate Protestantism came through this idea that we are going to create a Christian-like world through a new world order, an order in which it's the new world. It's like a New Testament world. It's a Noahide kind of world in which the whole world is a pseudo quasi-Christianity, and that's our foreign policy. That's what the neoliberals and the neocons all join hands on. Who is the false prophet and deceives unbelievers to worship Antichrist through false signs, miracles, and wonders, and et cetera. The prosperity gospel and all of these things that we have exported to the rest of the world has seduced the world into a false Christianity. That's a pseudo lust after greedy gain and wealth and power and delicacies, as you're going to see as the study ends on delicacies. And this idea that how God really gives us bread of trial and hardship and testing in the wilderness, and Satan lures us into delicacies that warp, twist, and ruin our souls. And there's a version of American evangelicalism and fallen Protestantism that has been basically exported to the world, and the world has consumed a false doctrine of America, which is looking to have this quasi-Christian dominion over the world. And Rome is going to have nothing of it because she, the northern, the king of the north, the little horn power, is not going to put up with that nonsense. We're the rebellious child coming home, in their mind, Protestantism, and we're the prodigal child, and we're going to be brought to heel by daddy with his giant switch that he's going to whomp us with. So the king of the north is old medievalism, and the king of the south is going to transform into an unfortunate neo-medievalism. These animals are mentioned in Daniel chapter 7, verses 4 through 6, where the leopard represents Greece. Jovan means young man. And the bear, Medo Persia, the idea of paradise, or it's a kind of a picture of Cyrus, but the kingdom of Cyrus starts to go demonic, and it becomes an image to Babylon, basically. So here we go. Shalom. So God is letting us know through the book of Daniel, just as a small review, is that why does God let this evil power rule and have so much authority and so much ability to touch the people of God? God says, believe it or not, they're my servants. I allow them to be as a sanctifying instrument for my people to bring about and to temper, and even as a catalyst for our humility, for our, is like what was Saul in his persecution of David? What value did it have to the soul of David? Well, if you're going to really wear a crown in the kingdom of God and be a son of God and reflect his image, it's going to have to be at the cost of our ego, pride, and self exaltation, self glorification, and these ways in which pride takes over and destroys and ruins and foments a spirit of pretentious rebellion in our hearts. God's got to bring that down. He's got to bring that down town to Chinatown. He's got to get down into the root of that stuff, and he's going to bring us to the dust of the ground, and we're going to sweat great drops of blood. And through that, and in humility, he has cursed us for our sake in that way. Really, Dave? Those four beasts in the book of Daniel was from God, not just Satan? Well, Hosea chapter 13, 4 through 10 breaks it down. Yet I am the Lord your God ever since the land of Egypt. He's not ever not been on the job, but God has always been on the ball. And so he's not basically out on vacation like the prophets of Baal thought God was. God says, I'm on the job. And he says, you shall know no other God but me, for there is no savior beside me. Now, we think we understand that doctrine, but we have this way of categorizing it to intellectualism or some kind of an assent to an idea. But God knows the true state of the soul of his people, of you and me, those that use his name even in vain. So he gets down to the real stuff. And we've got to trust the fact that God sees something in us we don't see in ourselves. This is what Satan does in his counterfeit, or narcissist does. They are like fake reading you and saying, I know you better than you know you. That's Satan's counterfeit. But God, we trust ourselves into God's hands, and he's going to get down to the root of some things that we ourselves are unfortunately oblivious to, or we have basically shoved them down to our subconscious, our weird coping mechanism. So he says, verse 5, I knew you in the wilderness when you were being tested, in the land of great drought, when they had pasture and they were filled. So in bad times and in good times, I know your soul. I've always been the brilliant scientist in the laboratory reading your soul. And they were filled in their heart. They were filled and their heart was exalted. Pride, leaven, yeast in our heart. That which is inflamed. And they forgot me. You see, when things are good, we forget God. When things are going our way, we forget God. Maybe we should put on the altar even good things that are happening in our life and say, God, if you want to take this away, like Job, take it away. And what if God takes it away? Blessed be that God that giveth and taketh, because he's doing what is best for our souls. So God will be a lion. God will be a leopard, verse 7. By the road I lurk, says God. I, God, will meet them like a bear deprived of her cubs, and I will tear open the rib cage. Remember the bear with the 3 ribs? And there I will devour like a lion. The wild beast shall tear them. Remember the wild beast that tears in the book of Daniel? This is out of Hosea 13. God saying, I take full responsibility for commissioning Satan and his minions and his kingdom to do a sanctifying work on my people. That's necessary for your very soul. So don't curse God because this is happening. Verse 9 says, "O Israel, you are destroyed." Who's Israel? God's people. Those that have the imputation of heirship through the Israel kind of title that we're given. But your help is from me. In other words, I wound you, I heal you. I humble you, I exalt you. I bring you downtown to Chinatown, and then I place you in a high place. I take you to the washing machine. Verse 10 says, I will be your king. Where is any other that he may save you in all your cities? In other words, we worship other things quietly, even to our own misguided perceptions. We can't trust our own perceptions. God says, I know who's becoming your king. He says, go ahead, let them, those things that secretly or even unbeknownst to yourself, because we haven't been very watchful, and your judges to whom you said, give me a king and princes. We shift loyalty in prosperity. When things are going good, we start to think that the vessel in which God is allowing good to come to us, that they are the means, and we start to deify those vessels. And then God changes that. So let's go to Daniel 11. We tend to bend our mind and attach ourselves to human vessels, and that becomes a danger of image worship. So Daniel 11, we're going to go into verses 2 through 6. I'm going to tell you what verses we're going through so you can understand. We're going to start off with verses 2 through 6, and then we're going to jump to 11, 15, 25, 20. Basically, we're going to be jumping through Daniel 11, and I want you to pay attention to what's going on here so we could really have a template for our minds these last days. So it says, and now I will tell you the truth. Amen. Remember, the last days, there is a lack of a love of truth. There is this no savor for truth. Remember, they are thirsty for great delusion, and God gives them great delusion. And he'll even give those who want and love and hunger and thirst for delusion. Do you know what he's going to do? He's going to give you false teachers to confirm and to give you the echo chamber that you so desperately want. And that is how he's going to seal you into destruction. That's how he's going to put you into a Jericho status. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. Now, Persia is king of the south in this picture here, as you will see. It is a ram goat that pushes. And the 4th shall be far richer than them all. So it says like 3 kings in Persia, and then the 4th, which is Xerxes, Artaxerxes, in history. But you're going to see that there's a reset to prophecy when it comes to the Day of Atonement. It's no longer on a time schedule, but it is event-based. It is pushed forward by events. And so there's time no more after 1844, when Christ moved from the holy of from the holy place to the holy of holies. It moves into a whole, quote, no time prophecy that you saw with the first compartment. You saw it connected to time. Second compartment, no time. It's all event driven, circumstantially driven. The 4th shall be far richer than them all, and by his strength, through his riches. Remember, Southern king, king of the south, American prophecy, lamb-like beast, ram beast. Once a liberating beast becomes an untamed power, hegemony in the world. He shall stir up all against the realm of Greece, the he-goat. And the scriptures likening, quote, this Grecian or this leopard-like goat to the papacy. That there is a head leader like Alexander the Great, and he was young, a Jovan. Jovan is the word for Greek, as you'll see in Hebrew, and it means young men. It's this kind of satanic picture. Satan likens himself to a young Mick Jagger. Satan likens himself to a young male model, Mr. Cool, Mr. Beautiful. He likens himself as Lucifer, that he was beautiful and young. And so you have the imagery of Greece, which just literally means the young man. It's this picture of long hair, and he runs wildly, and his hair is in the wind, and his teeth is like a lion, and he's Absalom. Absalom was a Jovan. And he is good looking, and he is young, and everyone follows him. They're enchanted with his kind of anti-heroism. And so basically, I know we see the papacy as a bunch of crusty old men wearing a bunch of priestly garments, but they see themselves, that's why they're really strong in their kind of their youth movement identity and everything else. They base everything on this young man image. Go into the history, you'll see what I mean. So in verse 3 of Daniel 11, then a mighty king shall arise, the little horn power, who shall rule with great dominion and do all according to his will. And you're going to see that from this conflict of Protestantism, like this American globalist Protestantism, and then this kind of neo-medieval or really old medievalistic king of the north Catholicism that's tied into all the world powers, you're going to see this rising up of this north king authority. And there are many reasons for identifying this king as Alexander the Great, as well as identifying the other rulers according to the relationship of the events to those times. In other words, Alexander the Great was a great image of Satan, of Lucifer. He was young, he was dynamic, he was polyamorous and pansexual. He was a glutton, and he died at 25 years old. I think he should have waited one more year. He could have been a part of the 26 club or 27 club, whatever it is, waited a couple of years. I mean, this is the idea that he is forever young, and he kind of embodies the spirit of Lucifer. And so this is this idea that everyone wept for Alexander. He's this leopard kind of bodied beast. And you'll see Alexander the Great, and then, he'll have like these leopard skins when you go to these pictures and these images of him in time. He's an Absalom type. And the Roman Catholic system sees himself as this little bull. If you remember Italy, the word Italy, Italia, means small bull. And remember, they worship the golden calf. Satan's always seen himself as young and virile, and this great hero that dared to question the ultimate authority, the precocious rebel that dared to defy the great established authority of God. This is the kind of that spirited image of dare and daringness and heaven daringness that is in the Roman Catholic system. It says there is nothing in context to limit it to. Okay, yeah, there's nothing in the context which makes it necessary to limit the passage to Alexander. Then again, some ruler may arise at the end times to whom the prophecy will apply. Well, we're talking about the little horn powers. You'll see through Daniel 11, it's the little horn power. It is the seat and power and the great authority of the papal system, in which there is the exaltation of the man. The man is deified, and that's the whole purpose of Rome, to get you to buy into that we are gods. And he has arisen. When he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided into the four winds of heaven. And you're going to see the four horn element there. There's an apparent defeat in which the southern king, or the ram beast, or this apostate Protestant lamb-like beast, goes against the, quote, he-goat mythical Catholic beast. And there's an apparent loss of the he-goat, of the Azazel goat. And there is the breaking of that power. But what you're going to see is its four horns that is pictured, as we talked about before, as an altar. And everything will be sacrificed in a, quote, Holocaust. If you're saying the word Holocaust comes from the Latin word whole burnt offering. And so when the Roman Catholic system was going all through the world in the medieval times, especially during the Crusades, that's the term they used, was Holocaust. They saw themselves as an altar, literally, in which they burn whoever is in opposition to their authority, dominion, and power, because they came in this kind of Christian dominionism, and they would kill, they would genocide entire people. And the word in the Latin Vulgate for the whole burnt offering was Holocaust. And so it was an offering. It was a sacrifice. It was a religious act, what they were doing. This was something in which they had the priests there and everything else. And this was what they see the world has to come to heal, that they are the ones that rule the, quote, the altar, the four horns, that they have authority of the four winds, the four directions of the compass, that everything is to submit themselves to their power, just as the image of an altar is of a mountain that is burning in the middle of a courtyard. That is a picture of dominion, rule, and power, and sacrifice and slaughter. You think that they're not this morbid? You don't think that this is the conversation in the magisterium? Then you know nothing about Catholicism. Nothing. Ask the Armenians. Ask other groups of people, Protestants, Jews, and Gypsies, if this is real. But not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. And you're going to see an apparent, this is what you saw in the Napoleonic rule, in which there was a great wound to that beast. And it says, and also the king of the south, the Re'em, this is this American power that comes up in Protestantism, Lamblike, shall become strong as well as one of his princes. Now, I'm not saying just the any particular president, but it is interesting what's going on now. Pay attention. And he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And then here it says, make the southern kingdom great again. Chapter 11, verse 6 says, and at the end of the years, they shall join forces for the daughter of the southern, you're going to see this, the southern kingdom, is going to go in and make these Abrahamic accords. This is, I'm not saying this is an exact fulfillment, but isn't it fascinating that Ivanka Trump was the daughter, a senior advisor in her father's administration, also the director of the Office of Economic Initiatives and Entrepreneurship alongside of her husband, Jared Kushner, who was named senior advisor to the president, who bought 666. This is the identifying power of the lamb-like beast. It's also Solomon's kingdom, right, which he taxed 666. Fifth Avenue, the Kushners bought in 2007 for $1.8 billion, and at the time, it was the most expensive real estate deal in New York City. Kushner was the primary Trump administration participant for the Middle East peace process. Remember, Ivanka Trump went from being a Presbyterian, converted to Judaism, and then her and her husband went to the Middle East to join forces and to, if you know anything about what's going on in the Middle East, anything about Islam, and anything about the oneness, the proxy reality that Islam is to Catholicism, temples and mosques are built side by side all throughout the Middle East, and you will see that if you are dealing with, quote, Islam, if you're dealing with Arabism, and you're dealing with Catholicism out there. And then so you have this incredible peace process, the Abrahamic Accord, and the Middle East process, authoring the Trump peace plan and facilitating the talks that led to the signing of the Abraham Accords and other normalization agreements between Israel and various Arab states. The agreements were named Abraham Accords to highlight the common belief of Judaism and Islam, which you have to understand, that's what Catholicism says that it is. It's crypto-Judaism. They have a priest class, they have a Levitical class, they have a magisterium, which is basically their Sanhedrin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and a high priest, which is a pope. They see themselves as being the continuation of Judaism. You don't believe that? Then you know nothing of what they teach within Catholicism. This is what they say about themselves. They call themselves crypto-Jews. That's why they're so caught up in Kabbalism. That's why they see themselves as a continuation of everything in the Old Testament. And shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. I'm not saying that was a total fulfillment, but it is a fulfillment. It is patterning itself very well in this prophetic motif of Daniel chapter 11, while we are in the Day of Atonement. The two beasts that are looking to clash and to mingle, which is the he-goat and the ram, we are in those days, and we're seeing these dynamics. Something to pay attention to. But she shall not retain the power of her authority. Somehow that process starts to break up. And neither he nor his authority shall stand. We saw what happened kind of even in the last, I mean, not this election cycle, but the one before. You will see now there's this new rising up of the ram beast, the southern king, after this process. But she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, her father, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So the Abraham Accords melted. We see this war in Ukraine, and we see now the Middle East is on fire, and the king of the south shall be moved with rage. New election. Let's see what happens. And will go out and fight with him, the king of the north. Wow. Interesting what might be on the horizon here. Pay attention. Who shall muster a great multitude? King of the North. The Catholic he-goat power, leopard Jovan beast that is mingled with the rest of the globalist powers that are arrayed against the post-Protestant King of the South, Lamblike ram beast, America. Muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. Uh-oh. Temporary win for King of the South coming. And it looks like the King of the South is going to prevail, but shortly lived. Verse 12. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up. Wow, the King of the South has a temporary success, and then his heart is lifted up, and there is a stone cold confidence and presumption that he's prevailed. And he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail in the end. I don't know how it's going to be a loss at the end. Assassination, other intrigues, something, but he will not, prevail. Oh, darn it. Sorry about that. For, verse 13, you have to understand everything that's connected up with the global Roman Catholic powers is BRICS, is the rest of the banks. It's all the powers that exist in this global hegemony that's really out there, including all the rest of the Western Hemisphere is all Latin American Roman Catholic. We're surrounded, folks. If they subscribe to communism, to socialism, to fascism, that is all neo-medievalism. This was the last holdout. There's an attempt to regain our original roots of Protestantism and us being a, quote, sanctuary. But he will not prevail. And he'll muster a multitude greater than the former backlash of the northern power, King of the North. Him looks to the satanic power that looks to prevail over the sides of the North. Ultimately, for this papal globalist power has to cast the sanctuary to the ground, has to create a required obeyance to its authority, to think to change times and laws. Anyone who's a Bible prophecy student is following me. If you're not, it's going to be difficult. And then ask for the help of those that are students who've been in prophecy. It shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army with much equipment. The downfall of this lamb-like beast, ram beast, as you're going to see here, because there's a temporary victory and then a great crashing that you're not going to prevail when the rest of the world is taken over by this power. Apparently, we think, oh, these things are all separate. No, they're not. No, they're not. Iran, Russia, China, Turkey, the entire world system is completely been as a captured system. South America, Central America, even above us in Canada. You're going to see that there's going to be a temporary victory and then, quote, a backlash of the King of the North. Now, in those times, many shall rise up against the King of the South. The lamb-like beast, the ram beast, that was once a liberator beast, will be broken. And you'll see this played out in Revelation 13, where he starts to, you'll see the process of the mark, the seal, and this whole dominion thing, that who could make war. Also, violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. King of the South stuff. They will exalt themselves and speak great words, but they will come tumbling down. It will be a brave attempt by the King of the South but it will not prevail. So the king of the north, remember, Satan looks to literally sit at the throne of God. God is pictured on the north side. This is a picture which ultimately is not just about world dominion, but ultimately about worship and Satan working through earthly diminutive powers through this idea of which I believe the Roman Catholic is the ultimate harlot beast, but its fingers are in a lot of things that don't wear the Catholic uniform. Satan is looking really by proxy to receive worship. And I believe at the end of time, he's going to come out of the closet, high heels and all, with all of his smeared lipstick and all the twistedness. He's going to literally come out impersonating himself as Christ, because in the end, he doesn't want to be worshiped through some proxy or through some vicarious process, through some instrumentality. In the end, I think Satan will actually show up and receive the worship that he so lusts after. And it's through this process of the king of the north. Remember, we have a lamb-like beast that's going to get slaughtered in this Holocaust or this atonement process. And that lamb-like beast that comes up from the land, this ram beast, I really believe will be the Protestant America Holocaust. It shall come and build a siege mound through sanctions, you'll see that it has all the traffic of the merchants, of the shipping industry, of the maritime industry, of the import, of export, that we are so vulnerable as a nation, United States, to we have farmed out everything. That right now, that's what you see this administration is trying to bring back, this kind of we're going to use our own resources type of thing. But remember, this has got to happen so fast because it's supposed to be that the southern beast, the southern king, the lamb-like beast, the Re'em, is going to be besieged and basically be ravaged by the fact that it is not able to sustain itself, and this land becomes a wilderness. And take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. The lamb-like beast, the ram beast, the one that had great power, this Persian-like power, the United States of Persia in self-rule and representative power and all this stuff, will not prevail. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. In the end, this lamb-like beast that becomes a great power becomes broken. One power we do have that no other power has is military might globally. So that becomes basically taken over, and there's a worldwide enforcement of the dominion, power, and authority of the king of the north. And Satan ultimately is the king of the north, the ultimate king of the north, the true evil that is perniciously trying to make its way into the throne room. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And believe me, that power has been growing ever since that wound has been healed through world wars. Why do you think there's this constant provocation of war, war, war? Because it's the shift of power to the king of the north. And those that are even Catholic that are in rule, we've even had a presidents and senators and Congress people and Supreme Court people, believe it or not, keeping us in perpetual war. Why? Because it is ever feeding the he-goat king of the north power for us to be in war. There is, especially if we're engaged in foreign war, there is the building up of the king of the north power. It was once a broken power, no more. And it was through war. All the world wars, and even this war on terrorism, that's an endless war, and this NATO concept and all this other kind of stuff. There has to be war for the constant building up of this he-goat power, this little horn power. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand. There's going to be these death fights, this revival, this sense of like rallies to, it's like someone dying. They're going to give their last rallies. And it's going to look like, okay, this is our comeback. This is our comeback. But ultimately, it does not work, Protestant America. Why? And you're going to see, why does God allow us to be defeated? The last bastion, the last kind of sanctuary of Protestantism in this world, is going to be overrun, and it's going to be called an abomination that causes our desolation. We had a great responsibility in proclaiming the everlasting gospel and the high priestly ministration of Christ, his everlasting righteousness through his priesthood of the Day of Atonement. And basically, we've become a bunch of harlots, and we have compromised ourselves, and we've loved our delicacies, and it ruined us. And so, she's going to burn like the Levitical daughter who became a whore that we are. For they shall devise plans against him, king of the south, lamb-like beast, Persian-like self-rule, and the library system and the postal system, and everyone was given their kind of autonomy and their freedom. It was representative government. That's what we modeled our government after. Believe it or not, we modeled it after Cyrus. Just ask Jefferson, just like as who was the second president after Washington? I can't think right now. But anyway, yes. Those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. Why did Daniel, we'll get into this. Why did Daniel not eat of the delicacies from the king's table, from the king of Babylon's table? You see, this is where Protestantism had a work ethic. American Protestantism really believed in humility, and each person was equal, and there was no kind of two-tier justice system, and the respect of persons and all that kind of stuff, and then advantaging certain families and disadvantaging others, and this whole fake social justice in which you're going to switch around who's the preferred group to basically create this kind of false equity in which you are changing the privileged group according to your, quote, divine idea of what you think is right, and you're going to advantage and disadvantage different groups. In other words, you're going to disadvantage blacks here, but then advantage them over here, and then disadvantage whites over here, and then, it's just various kind of ways that medievalism worked. Well, you're seeing it now when you're seeing this whole pitting race, pitting class, pitting different things against each other. And then what happens is once you start playing these medieval games of delicacies, and playing into people's kind of prejudices and all this stuff, is you'll see what delicacies mean. Once we, as Protestant America, that literally all people were equal, all people should have pure access to the same rights, and we're all equal in the eyes of God and should be between one another according to our laws. Well, we eat of the portion of his delicacies, and his army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts will be bent on evil. This is where the he-goat and the ram go at each other at full force. Don't just look at history. Look at present circumstances in which this is playing itself out in this anti-typical Day of Atonement. And they shall speak lies at the same table. And what you're going to see here is this is now this fake peace, and there's intrigue and lies, and they make a covenant with each other. And what happens, you're going to see nothing but betrayal. But it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. The moyed gets. God's will prevail. His priestcraft will prevail. There will be a false sense of a pseudo-Christianity, of a Noahide kind of a thing, where you have a weird branded Zionism is going to play out as Judaism. You're going to see Catholicism will be played out as the established church, and then you'll have apostate Protestantism, and you're going to see this, and then you're going to have Islam, and you're going to have all this kind of pseudo kind of peace accord in which they all find their peace on earth. But God says, I'm going to disrupt that. Where you say peace, I'm going to bring a sword. And there's going to be, and what does it? The proclamation of the everlasting gospel that your righteousness alone is in your heavenly high priest in Christ, and not on the peace that comes from these kings of the earth and these accords and these peace agreements that really is ultimately a tacit what's the word? I'm requiem. So I can't think of the right word. But basically, where you're really handing the power over Satan. Satan created the peace, it's an Absalom peace. And so you have this basically deference to a energy, a spirit, a demonic king that works through the kings of the earth. And there's a false peace that Babylon brings, but it is coming from another dimension and it is running against God. It has to go against the law of God. It has to violate the dominion, authority, and power that the law requires on his people. The law is telling you the righteousness of God, and he is telling you to submit to his righteousness. And those that are blood-bought, born-again children of the King will obey the law of God because they are sons and daughters of God. And they are there to reflect his glory and to show that they are citizens of his kingdom, and they're written in the Lamb's Book of Life. That's why they keep the commandments of God. And then so this false peace, this acquiescence to Satan's power is going to give us peace in Babylon, but it will be a lawless peace. It will think to change times and laws and then bring us into this for our temporary survival, in the sense that everyone wants peace after all of this kind of conflict. Really, Dave, you think that's going to happen? It is happening. So shall be the end, moyed, right here. Moyed. And then gets. I've done tons of study on moyed gets, and please understand that the feasts in the Bible are representational of salvific chronology. When Christ first came, it was the spring feasts, and his ascension, spring feast, Pentecost, unleavened bread, Passover. And then there's a summer period of the 1260-year day process of medievalism, and this kind of process in which Satan has his summertime dog day to rule under the great summer heat. And then comes the fall season, in which the time we're in now, where it's the Day of Atonement, you have the trumpets, and then the return of Christ of the Feast of Trumpets. That's a moyed getz. Getz is end. Like when someone is divorcing, someone says, I'm going to hand you a getz in Hebrew. That means I'm handing you the end, the dissolution of our marriage. A little Hebrew there. Verse 29 of Daniel 11 says, at the appointed time, at this time in which Christ moves into his work of the Day of Atonement, and during the context of the Day of Atonement, he shall return and go forward the south. Appointed time, he shall return and go toward the south. In other words, the northern king, the he-goat power, the Catholic globalist power, during the last stages of the high priestly administration of Christ, he's going to go at full force towards this apostate Protestant. In its apostasy, he's going to go full force against it to break it. But it shall not be like the former or the latter, a time of trouble such as never been. That's what it's giving us, like a foretelling of. This will be, there's been levels of stuff, but this is immeasurable. Verse 31 says, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary forces, and shall take away the daily and place the abomination of desolation. In other words, a global submission to the dominion of Satan. And this is where he goes and attacks the law of God, attacks the worship in the law of God, attacks the fact that there is no other gods. Well, Satan is going to set himself as a god. Had no image. Satan was made in the image of God as Lucifer. Now we're worshiping an image. And then take God's name in vain. And that is not coming under the authority and the dominion and bearing his name, but not submitting to God. These are all commandments. The fourth commandment, the Sabbath, is to rest in his works and a sign and a seal between the bridegroom and the bride. And then it is a violation of the Sabbath. And then it's a Sunday worship. It is the sun god idea. It's the dog series. In other words, it's the first day of works. It's his day in the sun. Satan wants to be worshipped as a day star. That's why he has always picked Sunday or the sun god or that which is under the sun to memorialize creature worship. And he's the first creature. Christ is not the first creature. Christ always was. He's eternal. He's part of the Godhead of Echad. But Satan, being first creature, being firsts, he wishes to be worshipped, and Sunday keeping is his memorial to himself. He's the Jovan. He's the young man. He's the Alexander the Great. He's the sun god. And so eventually he wishes for worldwide. So defiling the sanctuary fortress, which is the proclamation of our righteousness, is deferred to a high priestly ministry in heaven. Now it's all about self-righteousness and that which is righteous in the eyes of authorities, powers, and dominions on earth, that Satan is ruling through these institutions and these human leaders, shall take away the daily or the Talmud or the high priestly ministration, the continued representation or him putting himself in our place. That gets shut off. And then now everything is under the sun. We're just living according to how to go along, to get along, and what we have to do to survive and how we can posture ourselves into a prosperous position by deifying the powers and the authorities of this world. We got seduced by delicacies, believe it or not. So, and the place, the abomination of desolation, the ultimate official warfare against God, national apostasy of America goes to an international apostasy. And this is, quote, what I believe to be that there is the codifying of laws that violate the Ten Commandments. And some of those, that's why you have this, they're trying to codify the abortion thing of thou shalt not kill, all these things, and then you'll see the Sabbath and the Sunday thing. You're going to see all this stuff playing in because Satan is looking to establish his dominion on earth as long as it's in violation, it's codified against the law of God. Just like you had in the time of Persia, right? The southern king, this ram beast king, you had the violation of God's law of prayer, and Daniel couldn't pray. And then they couldn't reverse that process. And then Daniel was thrown into a time of trouble such as never been since there was a lion's den, and he entered into that great process. Same thing with Nebuchadnezzar and the three worthies. They were told to bow down and to worship, and it was a law. And then we know you should have no other gods, and there is, quote, make no image, etc., and you'll not take his name in vain, etc. When it becomes a codified thing, it is now attacking the sanctuary of God, and those that by their free will are submitting to the dominion and authority of God by keeping his commandments as a witness and testimony that they were under his authority, his dominion, that he's the King of kings and he is the Lord of lords. And once Satan goes to war against that, you will know that Satan is looking to seize his dominion and his obedience and his worship. Verse 35 says, and some of those of understanding, this is Daniel, the obsession of Daniel and the obsession of Christ referring to Daniel is, you want understanding? Pray for understanding. You want wisdom? You need to pray for wisdom. You want to understand what's going on? You want the veil lifted up? You need to pray for these things, and I will show you. I will show up and show you that this is about who's your Lord. And Satan is playing his games, and he is appealing to the very most basest of our nature. And then he wants to go ahead and create whited sepulchres and then put lipstick on the pig and say, well, we need to do this to get along now. And that's a very Babylonian way of thinking. Shall fall. Now, what of those of understanding shall fall. And you'll see it's the word, and it's this picture here of being shattered to pieces to refine them. God allows these things to happen that we cannot bow down. We must bow down to Christ, and we must not bow down to this, quote, defiant, demonic, fallen system that's at war against God and his law and his government. Well, you will be chased out into the wilderness. You will be devoured. You'll be hunted down. You'll be as a partridge hunted down, just like Saul was hunting down David, to refine them, to purify them, and to make them white until the time of the end, the moed gets, because it is still for the appointed time. God is bringing everything to a conclusion. So Daniel chapter 12, we're just going on. We're just going from 11 to 12. It says, at that time, Michael. And you see this picture of every time Christ goes into a defender's position of his people, this name that he dawns himself with, he calls himself Emmanuel. Is that Jesus's name? He's from Mexico. His name's Emmanuel. He calls himself Palmone in Daniel chapter 8, verse 13. Is his name Palamone. He calls himself Yeshua. Is that just his only name? He calls himself many names because of titles. He basically fundamentally has 4 names for his titles. His name is a nameless name, which is I am that I am, Yahweh. But he fundamentally functions as Yeshua, a lion of the tribe of Judah, right? He functions as Michael, as a great defender. He functions as a Palmoni, and he functions as an Emmanuel. And those 4 classes of angels, those 4 beasts that surround the throne, is a reflection or administration of those 4 fundamental roles that Christ is in when he is advocating for his people, when he is demanding his altar to be submitted to, in the 4 powers, the 4 horns, the 4 horsemen, and the executive power that they have been commissioned to reflect his dominion and authority. Christ is Yeshua. Christ is Emmanuel. Christ is Palmoni, and Christ is Michael. And all Michael is, when God goes to war and he now goes into a war face against Satan, he calls himself Michael, which means who is like unto God. Why are you going to war with me? Do you think you're going to win? We should be praising God that when Satan puts Moses in the ground and says, you lost, buddy, you smacked that stone, you should have just spoke to it. It is Christ in war mode that decides to raise up Moses and say, get thee behind me. You have no authority here. And when we hear the evocation of Christ being named Michael, Christ is going to war. And he does war with the grave, the ultimate enemy of us all. Death, the grave, and the condemnation that comes from the mouth of Satan as our accuser, in which the wages of sin is death. So when Christ comes on and goes to war with death in the grave, he comes as Michael. It's not that hard to understand. It's not rocket science. So the great princes who stands watch over the sons, great prince, Christ. He's called the Prince of Peace, right? This is the Prince of Life he's referred to. Prince is a sar, one who is going in an act of warfare against. When he's prince, doesn't mean that, oh, he's the son of the king. No, he's the young version. He's his own young man versus young man. A prince is the idea is that he's going to grow his hair long and he's going to go to war. He's going to bring his friends along and he's in a war mode. When David was back into war mode and where Absalom was at war with his own dad, he was a prince now. He was now in active warfare and he's going to let his hair grow long and he's going to do some wild stuff, strange stuff, unusual stuff, great feats of warfare. That's a prince, a sar, where you get sheriff from, Sharif, who stands watch over the sons of your people. Praise God that God is not an inactive God. He goes into war mode. Who is like unto God? Who's going to go to war with God? He gets indignant. He becomes Michael. And there shall be a time of trouble. That's right, because it's jostling. It's a Game of Thrones. It is a war, cosmic war of thrones. Satan made his move. Now God's making his move. That's what the time of trouble is. God's making his move and Satan's making his move. And these are the final conflicts. This is a Armageddon, such as never was since there was a nation. We are now in the battle of the mega war. The giants, the titans are now fighting. And we are the ants underneath their feet. Even to that time and at the time of your people shall be delivered everyone who is found in the book. Make sure your name's in the ledgers. Make sure you're not so caught up in North Wind and South Wind and all the drama that's swirling about. Make sure that you're not just fascinated as a spectator, that this is a call for you to enter into the sanctuary, to enter into supplication, petitioning, and communion with Christ. And he is as a hen who gathers his chicks, and he is there to protect us from the certain desolation and the warfare in which his own sanctuary has been, his own people have participated in the rebellion, and he judges his house, but he's still a sanctuary to you. if you should so choose to receive his protection. Verse 3 of Daniel 12 is a continuation of 10, 11, 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, 7, 8, 9. If you go through the book of Daniel, you'll start seeing that this all was just one idea. This was all an unraveling of a scroll. They're not separate issues going on here. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament. God purifies his people by stripping them of every single ounce of their pride, every single ounce of their self-sufficiency, every bit of our, quote, propensity to glorify and to worship ourselves and to say, look at me, look at me. It's all brought to the dust of the ground under this very intense and strenuous condition where we would say, who could stand? Who could stand before the awesome and mighty God that pours out his wrath? And what God is showing you is that you'll be made pure and white through humility, brokenness, being shattered, and confession. And those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, and you'll notice it's sealing words. Shut up, the words, seal the book, end of time. These is a sealing message. The exalted warrior Christ coming in war mode as Michael will go to war, and that process will bring his people through a purification. And many shall run to and fro. The word to and fro is sackcloth picture of something that is a rough garment. Like animals, when they are in a cage, are kind of, you'll see them go to and fro. If you're wandering, you're going to and fro. If you're restless, you go to and fro. When you're in repentance, you're in a to and fro. If you're at the fish gate, you're rocking back and forth, you're going to and fro. If you are having God scan your soul, you're going to and fro. If you're weighing things out on this end and this end and this end and this end, and God is bringing you through a self-examination process, you're going to and fro. And through the knowledge of the purpose and the person and the priestcraft of Jesus Christ and the illumination and how God opens up a true assessment of our soul, we're going to and fro. Knowledge increases. The knowledge that increases is the knowledge of God, his glory, his righteousness, and the works of his judgment causes you to search your soul and to go to and fro. And knowledge shall increase. The knowledge we're getting now, the knowledge that is coming through these teachings, it is easier and more clear to understand prophetic light because it's in the light of the office of the ministration of Christ in heaven, and how Satan's going to war with that by literally going to war with the gospel. That is the gospel, by the way. The gospel is not me, and the gospel is not you. The gospel is not us, and the gospel is not your church, and the gospel is not our beauty and our sanctification and our holiness, that we are holier than thou and other people. We compare ourselves to other people, and we take great pride in our glory. That's not the gospel. The gospel is hyper, uber, extremely Christ-centric. There are many men that go to war with that. They're fascinated with their feelings and their experiences. And that's the only gospel they like. That's the only gospel they want to hear. That's the only gospel they consume. If it's personally a personal experience and blessing to them that feeds into their comfort and their sense of validation, that's their gospel. The gospel has a way of invalidating man, invalidating Christ. Verse 6 says, and the man clothed in linen, who is Christ, mediating as an advocate. When he's in linen, the high priest is in linen on the Day of Atonement. He's out ministering in the daily. When he, he's before the Lord in nakedness. And then when he puts on the, quote, the golden girdle and all the accoutrements of the breastplate and everything else, he's out of the courtyard or in the holy place, who is above the waters of the river. And this was the question in Daniel 8:13. How long shall be the fulfillment of these wonders? And this is Palmoni. This is his work as the wonderful numberer. And the book of Numbers is when God brings his people into the promised land, and he brings them in a numbered fashion. When he numbers, it's when he's going through the ledgers and saying, this is a valid member, this is a valid member. It's through imputation of righteousness. It is our title to heaven. And then he brings us into warfare as a fitness for heaven. First title, fundamentally and then fitness and sanctification. Title, justification, fitness, sanctification. But what does he do? How long is, when is he going to, quote, complete or finish the work of the ledger in which the book is sealed, and those that are saved, and those that are lost, and those that are holy, and those that are unholy, and those that are righteous, and those that are unrighteous, and those that are, clean, and those that are filthy. When does he basically bring about the permanent, with permanent marker, the sealed, the shutting up, now the sheep and the goats and the separation, when it's final? When does this finally take place? And it's all hinged on the Day of Atonement. And then verse 7 says, I heard the man in the cloth linen, the mediating Jesus Christ for the people of God, who was above the waters. And then he held up his right hand, and God swears by no one higher than he can himself. He swears upon his own bosom, his own righteousness, his own personal holiness. He says, and his left hand toward heaven, just like you saw in Revelation chapter 10, and go and prophesy again. That's what's happening now. Please hear this message. And swore by him who lives forever and ever, himself, Christ is our life, our resurrection, our holiness, our righteousness, our perfection, our second Adam, that it shall be for time, times, and half a time. This is 1260, but it's also that 1260 had a symbolic meaning. It was very covenantal language of many, many tekel uphares, was time, times, and half a time. If you understand the temple language of, he's talking about taking something, multiplying something, and dividing something. This is language of inheritance, and the fact that something is divided, something is multiplied, and then something is brought about as a singular idea. It's counting, it's numbering. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, God perfects his people by shattering us. You cannot move into a different idea of what this shattering process is. When God is shattering us, he's getting us to, quote, like you saw in Daniel chapter 2, the image was shattered. Why? Because the stone, the rock of offense, the stone of stumbling, the one set in Zion, no other foundation, Christ our righteousness, and the entire kingdom is built upon the one who swears by no one higher than himself to be our righteousness, and to proclaim and to rest and to stand on his righteousness on that day when God judges all righteousness. And there's no man's righteousness that will be accounted on that day, but save one man, Jesus Christ, and all other righteousness will be a failed righteousness, defiant to God's established and validated and declared righteousness, which is, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased, a singular holy one that is the mediator, that righteousness, Jesus Christ, the Israel of God, the triumphant overcomer, the Goel, the champion of God's people. You mean that God, that Savior, no other one, that elect chosen one? That is the one that says, fall on me, be shattered on me, and you will be established. But don't let this rock fall on you, because you'll be ground to powder and you will be of no use. So he shatters us by attacking our righteousness, exposing even our whited sepulcher, what we think in pretense of righteousness, in which we compare ourselves to that which is around us, like the Pharisee. God says, beat your breast, stand afar off, not so much as look up, and you will walk away justified. Be shattered. All these shall be finished, completed, made perfect through shattering. Verse 8 says, although I heard, I did not understand, because the flesh cannot understand things of the Spirit. The flesh says, no way, no comprendo. Then I said, my Lord, what shall the gets of the Moedim? How is God going to bring this about? Of these things. And he says, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up. This is all sealed language, sealed and till the time of the end. The Moed gets. It will play out in the Day of Atonement. It will play itself out with the 10 trumpets. And on the 10th day, you will have this. It's this idea. It will play itself out at the end, when I am now going to bring emphasis to the high priestly ministration of Christ on the Day of Atonement, to prepare people for the tabernacle of entering into the New Jerusalem, made bright and white and singing praises to God, and the veil is lifted. So through that process, verse 10 of Daniel 12 says, many shall be purified, made white, and refined, but the wicked will do wickedly. Don't worry. They that lead in captivity will lead into captivity. They that will seek to kill by the sword, they will kill by the sword. God will empower Babylon. God will empower the king of the north. God will empower the wicked to do wickedly. God will empower delusion. He will empower the demons to be released from their restrictions, and they will come out from the bottomless pit or their restrictive kind of place. It's not an actual place. It's that God limits their power. They will now have a free run of things. It's going to be one giant spiritual freak off. They're going to go hog wild. That's where you get the word orgy from, by the way. The word orgy, thermo-orgy, is the word the wrath. Thermo, heat, orgy, the wrath of God. The wrath of Satan is a thermo-orgy. He has his own licentious, unbridled, totally broken of any restraint, in which his desires is completely unfettered, completely just turned loose. Just the dam has burst. That's what wrath means. Thermo-orgy, orgy. So when he shows up in the clouds of glory, or at the first process where the dam is breaking is the seven bowls, and then he shows up and it's the full wrath because the brightness of his glory and everything melts with fervent heat. That's his thermo-orgy. He wishes to destroy the rebellion, sin, sinners, and the entire thing that is a blight of destruction and death and corruption and ruination and ugliness and foulness. In his kingdom, God has nothing but a pure hatred for sin. He purely hates it. And none of the wicked shall understand. Hey, great delusion. They will be even more blinded. Blind, deaf, hard. Delusion, given power, validating in their paradigm, handed over. Adokimos, given over to their delusional doctrines, their delusional ideas, their delusional grandiosity, their self-deification, wherever channels it comes from. False teaching in Christianity, theosis, this kind of triumphalism, whatever. Everything is fulfilling their expectations. They see no reason to repent. None of your crying, none of your pleading, none of your petitioning, even none of your sad, sorry face when they are being abusive to you. It's like the malignant narcissist and how they're just basically getting off on the idea, just like the psychopath, the sociopath, loves to hurt the empath, loves to wound the codependent, and sees your face of tears and sweat and humiliation and shame as triumphant, and that you're trying to shame them. I remember my dad did that to me once. I was living up in the country. My mom did the same thing. My mom and dad had serious mental health problems. Both did. They're both passed now. So I'm not doing this to shame them. Nobody that my mom, my dad, my brothers, I only have one brother, he's in prison. Nobody watches my videos. Nobody from my childhood watches videos. So I'm going to speak very freely to you. Remember one time that my father was, we're going to be thrown into a foster home. We ended up really living on a farm up in the country, Northern California. And my father came up to visit us, but it was always this nightmare when he did. We were taken on my mom's cousin because of her violence and her neglect and food and violence and just crazy, right? So we end up going to go to foster care, but my father comes in and then, I'll take them. And then, no, we're going to be given to this kind of farm ranch life in Northern California. And he wasn't taking care of us. It was, relatives. So he goes up there and he my dad was a Golden Glove boxer and a biker and big muscles and tats and very intimidating, scary person. And what was sad was that he, and I've always kind of protected my brother because he was always non-athletic, very he had that creative mind. You could see that he was on the verge of possible mental breakdown, but he was fighting all he could. My father goes up there and starts to antagonize my brother and slapping him around in the slap fight, but also shaming, humiliating, and pressuring him and cornering him. I said, "Hey, Dad, can I jump in? I could slap fight." So anyway, and I'm just this kid, right? I'm a very skinny, young 15-year-old kid, and I go into slap fight mode. And he's a boxer. I mean, he's got big, giant hands, big muscles. He's like 280 pounds at that point. Very kind of tattooed up, very intimidating. Had this kind of, we call him the shark gorilla. And then we're doing the slap fight thing, and then I get in a good hit, and it was just instinct. I'm more athletic at that time, stuff like that. So I hit him, I got him good, and then he reels back, and he hits me so hard that I just saw stars. It was a flash of white stars. I almost passed out, and that was it. I wasn't saying anything. I wasn't doing anything. I was just trying to step in for my brother. My father thought that knocking me almost out, and me not saying, I didn't cry, I didn't do anything, even though my face was all swollen, my cheek was all swollen, everything's all swollen, my eye was all swollen, that I didn't whine, I didn't moan, I didn't do anything. But the swollenness of my face was me trying to shame him. So he took this big giant glass ashtray and tried to throw it and crack my head open with it, and he just barely missed. And then he yelled at me for about six and a half hours, telling me to walk all the way back to San Jose, California. And I was literally hundreds of miles away. It was the middle of the night. And so he thought that him seeing the damage that he did to me was me shaming him. And I didn't whimper. I didn't cry. I didn't bawl. I didn't run away. I didn't do anything. I knew to not show any reaction. My mother had the same kind of problem. Like when she was, quote, accusing you of stuff and hitting and then telling you this is what you're doing and pulling your hair and punching you and slamming your head against the wall, if you at all showed her that you're innocent, like you don't say anything, if you're just looking at her and not crying and just saying, I don't know, I really don't know, I'm sorry, Mom, all this kind of stuff, you were doing that to make her feel like she was evil. Because you're playing this contrasting game. And even though you're just doing everything you can to not cry, to not try to shame them and everything else, but she even took that as, oh, you're trying to make me look bad, and then she would become more violent. That to me is a very real experience in seeing Satan channel through them, not Satan himself, but demonic power channel through that. I really believe that's what's going to happen at the end of time. I believe that our, quote, humility, our innocence, our turning the other cheek is not going to convert them. They will harden. They will not, quote, soften. We won't be a witness for their conversion. It's not at all how it's going to go down. We're going to get no like extra credit points for doing that. None. Okay. And the wicked shall not, but the wise shall understand. And from that time, the daily sacrifices supplied word, the daily, the Tommy, the ministration of Christ, Satan is looking to replace that. All evil powers looks to remove that which is right and righteous and appropriate, and then replace it. Like every good pimp is your mom and your dad. Every adulterous lover, is looking to replace the one that you are supposed to be loyal to, faithful to, have fidelity with. There's always a replacement. So the daily's taken away, the abomination of desolation is set up. There's no substitute for Christ. There is not a, quote, well, this is like Christ's ministry, therefore they are my gods on earth, they supply my needs, so I'm going to have to acquiesce and go along to get along. Well, that to God is an abomination that will cause a desolation. He will leave our house desolate. You want Satan? You want to be his lover? You guys can have the house. Have a good one. So let's get a little bit into, where are we at? 1.5 hours almost. We're getting there. Yeah, you guys are going to, whoops. I'm sorry, I should have been showing you guys this. So this was how we wrapped up Daniel 12. So let's go back to this concept of shattered, refined. That goes all the way back to Daniel 2. Why is the image shattered? Let's look at that. Daniel 2, verse 35 says, the iron, the fired clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. 1260 is that period of the medieval times where the papacy dominated, and basically the little sprout, the uncomely little sprout of the Protestantism that ultimately defeated and ultimately came into power. 1798, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, liberty across the world, etc. And then you have this drawn us into world war that gained the power of the Northern King, the papal Catholic worldwide power, turning us back into medievalism, the context in which that power can be. Well, what's fascinating, it says God orders a shattering amongst God's people. He's going to have to break up everything and create a threshing floor, a floor of judgment, a place in which everything is tested and separated, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing. The wind carried them away, and the winds of war, the winds of strife, the winds of testing, separating that which is to be burned up versus that which remains. And not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth, where this world becomes the very, quote, throne room, the foundation, just like on Mount Moriah. And you had that threshing floor there, Ornan's threshing floor, that became the chief cornerstone to the sanctuary of God. That is a picture, the representation of what earth is going to be. The very place in which there was the sacrifice of the Son of God, the Son of Man, will become, just like Isaac was to Abraham, the ram that was caught in the thorny bush. What's fascinating is that was representing what this world is going to become. In the end, Christ, who spilt his blood, this world becomes a threshing floor, but this world also becomes the very foundation of God's throne, and Christ claimed it and calls himself the chief cornerstone. And that stone that is cut out without hands destroys the kingdoms of Satan. So what is the value of shattering? This is the big one. This is the one where we're going to pretty quickly start to lose people. This is everyone's least favorite part of the studies. We're not going to get through the whole study. That's okay. You're going to get the gist of it. So what is the idea? Look at Ezekiel. Well, let's actually move past this. You will see in the book of Lamentations where God brings his people into a discipline, where God brings his people into a rod, where God disciples his people. I talk about this all the time. I get it. But I want you to hang on there and hang in there for what we're looking at right now. It's very important to understand. The way that Lamentations is the affliction of the Day of Atonement. If you want to understand what God's trying to bring his people through on the Day of Atonement and why he allows the desolation of his house, your house is left unto you desolate, he brings his people through a prep of cleansing and affliction and awe. Now, what's fascinating, when the book of Lamentations, that is a picture of Jeremiah the prophet showing you how to lament. Daniel 9 shows you how to lament. All through the scriptures showing you it's in Ezra and everything else. They're showing you Lamentations. Now you have a book called Lamentations. It is the little book that God is wanting to eat and to consume and to understand. It's going to draw you into a bitterness of belly. And understanding that we're going to confess our sins, even though, like Job, you may have done everything right, but there's still sinfulness that taints everything we do. Now, the letter Teth, in the Hebrew, in the book of Lamentations, you guys are going to appreciate this, those that are like Hebrew students. Tet, that word, you have to understand, in the book of Lamentations is an acronymistic book. In other words, Aleph, Bet, Kaf, it goes all the way through, Dalet, it goes all the way through, and there are sections for the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So in the shattered part of the book of Lamentations, the shattering, there is 3 times where in the kind of title as you get to that section is tet. That is what you bring together. That's the kind of, all the tets go together. All the alephs go together. All the shens go together, right? All the dalets go together. All the gimels go together. And then, so if you want context, a more robust context of shattered in the book of Lamentations, take all the tet. Now, you're going to see what the word tet means in a sec, or the letter even means itself. And it's going to play a very significant role as to what God does when he brings his people into a cleansing, purging process that is not what we would normally want. Okay? But I really want you to get a hold of this, because you're going to see the picture. It's a picture that's a circle that has an X in it, and it's an idea of a lid that holds something in, like the lid to a basket that seals something into a basket, that seals something into a basket. Or, are you ready for this? It's the bottom of a pit of a miry clay that holds you down, like you're stuck in that. But it's basically to hold you in, to circle you and to make you stuck. And it is terrifying and horrible as that miry pit, the bottom of the whale's belly, tet. That's what tet is. It brings you into Lamentations. It brings you into the belly of the whale, brings you to the belly of the earth. It rolls a stone over the grave. It puts a lid in which you are contained. And then God takes you through a purging process. In other words, he puts you in the washer machine, and then he adds the soap, and then he closes the lid, man. And God purges his people. So let's look at this tet. And you're going to see what this is here. We'll get into it a little bit so you get a little cool little Hebrew lesson. And this is tet right here. This is the ancient letter tet. This right here, this picture here is the Babylonian script. That's when they came out of Babylon. They were using that language. This is the old language that they're using before they went to Babylon. Pictograph. Okay? And actually, the irony is in tet, this stuck in the mud or stuck in the basket or sealed or kind of, it's got like a cross out, like it's a sealed kind of contained thing. It's actually kind of connected primarily to the word good or tov. Tev, tet, vav. It's the idea of really just sealing something in. And it's good. We say this is bad. But see, the wickedness in us says it's bad. The rebellious Jovan, the pretentious, precocious, rebellious little child in us, it is the one that doesn't want to be crucified, that gets super claustrophobic. I went and had a hyperbaric chamber today, in which for an hour I was stuck in this very pressurized, with oxygen and all this stuff for an hour, and I had to kind of deal with my claustrophobia. So I'm in there just saying, God, please help me not to freak out. But it was a type of tet. And you saw that in Zechariah chapter 5. When you go through Zechariah 3, for the filthy garments of Joshua, Christ bearing our sins. And then you had this accusation of Satan standing at the right hand of God accusing. And then God says, get thee behind me, Satan. And that's the work of Christ mediating for us and then bearing our sins and then imputing his righteousness. And then chapter 4 of Zechariah, you have the outpouring of the Holy Spirit based upon the imputed righteousness. But then you have chapter 5 of Zechariah. And chapter 5 of Zechariah is the baskets of wickedness in which water is poured through it. And there's the trappedness of wickedness. And basically, that is God's cleansing and purging process of trapping something in a basket, and the evil is trapped in, like through the filterization process. Imagine it like, they're carbon filters, or like a liver where all the toxins are kind of brought, like held in these baskets. And then we, unfortunately and sadly, realize, oh, wretched man that I am, who'll deliver me from this body of death. It is very much realizing how unfortunately attached we are to this toxic self that we are. And we cry out, and God says, you're crying out from the bottom of the well, the stuck in the miry clay or a sealed container. I hear your prayers like I heard Jonah's prayers, and I will deliver you. But I have to put you into that position, a tet. So I delay no more. We're going to go through the 3 tets of Lamentations that is associated with shattering, when God shatters his people. So it says in verse 9 of Lamentations 1, it says, her uncleanness stains her skirts. He shows you that your garments aren't white. Stained isn't the idea that he's throwing ketchup on it. He's saying that he's shining a light so you could see the stains, and you're saying, oh, I'm filthy. The light made me filthy. It's like a mirror made me dirty. She never considered her end, because why? We never see that we're being brought to the gates of hell, to the land and the lake of burning fire. We're being brought to our own ends, but we're just kind of bebopping along, fat, dumb, and happy, totally oblivious. Ignorance is bliss is what I always say. Don't show me my unrighteousness. Ignorance is bliss. What a blessed position to be in. Don't tell me of my wickedness. I am just bebopping along just fine, not knowing it. But she never considered her end. Her downfall was astonishing, because God's so willing to impute his righteousness. He's so willing to forgive. He's got mercy, long suffering. This is a God who's laid down his life and provided lamb skin for those that have tainted themselves with a foul garment. There was no one to comfort her. And that's what happens when God, in the end, when we have not received the imputed righteousness of Christ, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Lord, look upon my what? The day of atonement, my affliction, the necessary introspection and examination and humility, and bringing the glory of the dust of man to the dust of the ground, so we receive alien glory outside of us by proxy through a mediator vicariously through Christ. Real glory that God has already said that I'm well pleased with, sweet smelling savor. For the enemy boasts. Satan would love to get us to be enchanted and enthralled with our own creature, fumes and smell. We put our nose into our armpits and we just love our own stank. And we somehow think that our stank doesn't smell to God, but God says it's rotten zombie flesh. So Lamentations 2:9, we had 1:9, Tet, again, it's under the title Tet, the shattering. Zion's gates have fallen to the ground, and he has destroyed and shattered the bars on her gates. Her king and her leaders live among the nations. Instruction is no more, and even her prophets receive no vision from the Lord. What is God showing us? He's shattering his people. You're in a land of lies, delusion, abandonment of the Lord, the pretense of spirituality, and you're completely in a place where you're desolate of God. True beating of the breast, true lamentations, shattering. God ordained shattering, just like he ordained those beasts. Lamentations 4:9, 1:9, 2:9, 4:9, Tet, trapped, stuck, lid on, tomb, sealed, bottom of the pit, miry clay. The third one, those slain by the sword are better off than those slain by hunger, who waste away pierced with pain because of the fields lack produce. At the end of time, does God allow much of his people that are holy, that are righteous, that have imputed righteousness during the great time of trouble? Is there a great multitude that are slain? And is it God's mercy? And do you know what he says? Yep, because you don't know how terrible it's going to be once I let Satan and his dominion and minions and his forces completely be unrestrained, unfettered, unrestricted for a period of time. Better than those slain by hunger, because that is a sealing. When you die, you're sealed. Sealed for destruction or sealed for salvation. You have that lid placed upon you. You are, quote, at the bottom of Sheol, in the sticky mud. There's dirt over you. You're in the grave. You're sealed. You're settled. You're finished. God is able to bring that process about even while we are living through a living experience of death like Jonah or Job went through. God can bring that about where it is a living death, a living hell, a living seal, a Tet. And so pictographically, it is this: stuck in a circle, stuck, stick, super glue, fly paper, the closing of a prison door, chug bong. And so here is it right here. It's tet. This is the most mysterious out of all the pictographic Hebrew, because this is obviously like, here is kaf, a hand, right? Right here is like an arm, like a yod, lamed, a leg, aleph, a head, the top version of a tent, of a house, a bet, etc. Right? Dalet is a door opening and closing. Here's hay, where you get like, those things where they're selling cars or something like that, and they blow this image and it's got wind in it. It's like, hey, pay attention to me. That's what hay is. Vav is a tent stake. Ayin is an eye, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Samek is kind of like a sticker. Nun is like a seed that sprouts. Mem is like waters or mountains or something, or sedimentary, or the binding process. All this. This is Ta is like a sign or signpost, a crossroad. Shin is the teeth or fire. Resh is a head, right? So when you go through that whole process, you start to realize that this was the one that was the most mysterious. What does it mean? The circle of a snake? They're just kind of thinking maybe it's a process in which you are brought into a darkness. You're brought into a binding. That's all they kind of knew. Basically, it is a picture of all of that. So what you're going to see here is Job, where God brings God has to, if he's going to remove any speck of sin from us, I'm not talking about it's biological. It's not biological. He has to bring us to all the areas of our soul where sin is mingled, and yet we, through our false dialogue and paradigms that, we assess things wrongly. God sees things for what they are. He brings us through a cleansing process that's very difficult when he starts to separate that this is holy, this is unholy, this is righteous, this is unrighteous, this is filthy, and this is clean. And it's in our soul. It's not what goes in our mouth, it's what comes out of our mouth. So Job, and let's look at this process through Job, this shattering. And you're going to see here, he shattered me. Tet. He put me into a stuck place, and I can't get out until he releases me. And if we don't submit to that process, we're not going to submit to the sanctification, to the ordained cleansing process that sanctifies his people at the end of time, and they won't have their garments made white. Time of trouble such as never. And do you know why God hasn't made this abundantly clear, like maybe 15 years ago or 20 years ago, to his people? Because they couldn't bear this message. Now, as you see things as they are and things that are happening and how they're unfolding in this world and in your lives and in everything around you, the entire atmosphere, the miasma of this world, this isn't so hard to bear. Now God's people are saying, okay, hey, whatever it takes, let's just go through this thing. You're at that kind of part of the pregnancy where you're saying, just get this baby out, man. I'm just done being pregnant. Job 16, verse 7, 11 through 16, 21, etc. says, but now he has worn me out, shattered, tet. You have made desolate all my company. Nothing satisfies and everything is in a negative context. It says, verse 11 says, God has delivered me to the ungodly or the criminals. But what's interesting is in these ancient manuscripts, it says boys. The word is avil, where you get juvenile. That's what the Greeks are, right? Javin. You're surrounding me by these novices, by these kids and all their pretentiousness and their viciousness and their twisted idealism. And you're subjecting the wise to the foolish, the circumspect and the humble to the arrogant and the foul, and turned me over to the hands of the wicked and tossed me headlong into the hands of the wicked. I was at ease, like in Babylon, Zechariah chapter 1, or like Laodicea, that's what I put here. We're comfortable. We have found a kind of a place of comfort, and there's a niche, and we're asking God not to disturb our nest. but he has shattered me. Cleansed, sanctified, Kodesh, brought us into a breaking. And this is about not just accepting the process, praising him through the night of the process. We do have Job. It is okay to go into that scary place and have the questions we have. It doesn't disqualify you. But be careful. Your tongue may get you in a lot of trouble. The murmuring. He's also taken me by the neck. Why? Because we have a stiff neck. We have a hard neck. We have rebellion in our neck is always representational of our attitudes, of our emotional, spiritual attitudes. And shaken me to pieces. What do you think about the shaking now? Is it good or is it bad? Does God need to shake us and shatter us and take us by the neck? He has set me up for his target. God is zeroing in on me, and it looks like he's become like Esau to Jacob. God is now my enemy, pursuing me, and he's going to kill me. He's going to crush me. How can I go to war with God? It's an unfair war. Who can make war with God? Sanctification, purification, removing us from our own pretentious adversarial arrogance in which we are against God, like the Pharisees, like the Sadducees, like the scribes, like the priests, like the rulers, like those who never thought they were at war with God. They thought that they were God's advocates, God's defenders, God's lawyers. Be careful. You may be God's enemy when you see yourself in a very high position with all the jostling and the politicking and all the games we play in church and with ourselves and with our family members. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. His archers surround me. Archers, fiery darts. Man, some things that people are saying is hurting my ego. And he pierces my heart, literally kidneys. The place where we have our musings, our thoughts, our affections, our compassions down back there. I have kidney stones right now, and I go through kidney pains like you wouldn't believe. I have surgery coming up next month. And so if you want deep pain, deep feelings, deep kind of experiences, get shot in the kidney. God's getting down to the deep of the deep of our soul where things really are happening. Sometimes it's past our mind. Sometimes it's past our heart. Sometimes it's got to get down to the kidneys. And does not pity. Woo! Please, God, I can't hear you. I know, but you got to go through this. He pours out my gall on the ground. What's your gall? Your core bile. All this stuff that gets down into the very breakdown of everything, our very bile, the very stuff in which things are broke down. You know what I mean? Our bile, our gall. The most putrid area where everything is really broke down. Where all of the putrid things are stored. He says, I'm bringing that up to the surface. And we're like, no! All of our false coping mechanisms, all these toxic things in which really the core of our self-delusional narratives come from. Like the headquarters of how we talk nonsense to ourselves. Verse 14 says, and he breaks me with wound upon wound. Discipleship. That's rod across the back, cleansing, purging. And he runs at me like a warrior, but the Vulgate says giant, like a mighty one. In other words, this is an unfair fight. Who am I to go against God? And he's coming at me in full force. I am but dust. Isn't that the result of this? Isn't that the hopes that God brings us to our own infirmities, our own weakness, our own vulnerability? The very fact that we are delicately made. We're not the tough guy we thought we were. I don't feel that way when I'm having my kidney stones trying to pass. And believe me, that's only parabolic. We're talking about the Holy Spirit taking you through something a lot worse than kidney stones. And God's got to use these instrumental things, these circumstantial things around us to bring us into that place, because we don't bring ourselves there. We find a way to live in Babylon comfortably and yet say, but we're still good Jews. God's got to take us where we don't want to go. But he says, it's not because I've forsaken you. I am still with you. I have sewn sackcloth over my skin, the position we should be in, and laid my head, literally my horn, my power, my self-exalting instrumentality, where I toot my own horn or I push my way or whatever all the things a horn represents, a personal power, the ability to make something happen or to manipulate something or to enforce your will upon the horn of the will. And says he's now put it into the dust of the ground. Everything that's given me exaltation and power and authority has been brought to nothing. God's trying to help us get to a place we can't go by our own means. Our mechanisms are all broke down. We have a very, very faulty system for bringing ourselves down to our repentance. We're so buoyant that we can't get to the bottom of the seafloor of our soul. My face is flushed from weeping. It's the idea of bringing us between the porch and the altar, right? To the place in which God can now impute righteousness to us. And on my eyelids is what? The shadow of death. This is the journey of Psalms 23, where he leads us there. Then he sets a table in the presence of our enemy on the sides of the north, the showbread table. And he shows up and he comforts us and he tells us the battle is not yours, the battle is mine. That's where the valley of the shadow of death is. This is where God dwells amongst the lilies down in the valley. And he is there to say, your enemies are my enemies. You don't need your horn here. I am your horn. I am your salvation. I'm the anointed. Goel. I'm your Michael. I will fight for you. Anyone want to say amen? Oh, that one might plead for a man with God as a man pleads for his neighbor. And this is the point of Job, where his comfort is that he knows that he shall see God in his flesh and that his Redeemer is a man. God made himself a man so he could plead more eloquently for us than we can possibly plead for ourselves. Christ is more tuned into our needs than we are, and he rightly interprets our needs, even though we come at him with wrong words and a twisted assessment and false kind of petitions, where we're trying to say it, but God says, I know the unutterable of this. Well, let's get into this quote, Tet, how he lets the juveniles rule over us and why he sells us to these precocious, pretentious armies of the leopard power of this he-goat, an army of Alexander the Greats and their long hair and their teeth as lion and this youthful glory and rebellion. Joel chapter 3 verse 6 says, and I have sold the children of Judah to the children of Jerusalem and the children of Jerusalem to the Greeks, Tet, dregs, to the place of foaming effervescence, the foaming mud and mire of our soul. God says those who really are not and should not rule, the novice, kid, pretentious, arrogant ones, should not be ruling over you. I'm going to make them rule over you. Hey, you've been assigning youth leadership this whole time. Oh, I'm going to help him out he's a youth and we got to encourage him. So he's a novice. So we put him in leadership. And then we wonder why the church has made a head-on collision to the mountain. And we have now exploded the church because we give them over to the Jovans, to the youthful kids that are idealistic and cuckoo-eyed. And then we wonder why the church is completely headed off the cliffs. So that you may send them far away from their territory. In other words, they're going to scatter you. Psalm 69 verse 2 says, I have sunk in deep mire, Tet, where there is no foothold. God's will, God's intention, this is what he's trying to do. I have come into deep waters, tet, where a flood overwhelms me. Flood overwhelming, if you get into the core root word of worship, which is the idea that God takes you from an upright position to a horizontal position, from vertical to horizontal. Look at the word swim or swimming, and you'll see it's the root word in Hebrew for worship. When God overwhelms us, it forces us from here to here. And now, just like the ark is now floating and rising in a prostrate position. We're laid out flat. Ironically, we're rising as the waters rise. The root word for worship is to swim. Also, too, let's look at the horrible pit, the miry clay making us stuck. I cried out to God, Psalms 40. Psalms 40 is the place where it says that he writes his law upon our hearts, that he has given us a new song. But how does he do it? Look at verse 2. It says, he brought me up out of a pit, a horrible pit, the tumult of destruction, and out of the miry clay, and he set my feet upon that rock to be shattered, steadying my footsteps and establishing my path on the righteousness which is Christ's alone. Does this make sense? We continued on with the shattering process that he takes his people through in Daniel 11, Daniel 2, Daniel 12. It is ordained of God. It is preparedness for meeting him face to face. Look at Isaiah 8, 9, but we're going to give a little more context so you can understand the end days of which God looks to establish his people on the one sure rock, that when that great storm comes, that we're not building on sand. And what is sand? Sand was always likened unto God's people, right? I shall make you as the sand of the sea. Isn't that fascinating? Are we building our foundation on the people around us, on the church, on those who make up the church, on sand? Is your entire identity built upon sand, on who you are in the eyes of other people? You see, we're building on who is on first and who's in a privileged place and who is admired. And we look around and we compare ourselves to other people, and we want the best seat in the church, and we want to be recognized and validated. And we don't want our names known. We want our ministries known. We want numbers. We want recognition. We want validation. We want to build on sand. But God says that you need to, if you're going to endure the ultra storm, you're going to have to be built on the rock. Be shattered, O you peoples, be broken in pieces. Give ear, all of you from far countries. Gird yourselves. You see, this is the big thing. Gird the loins of your mind. Be careful of what births out of your mind. Be careful of what is produced in the fertility of that brain, of that murmur zone. But whatever you do, be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. Whatever happens, make sure you get shattered. A little more context here is Isaiah 8, 9, and we're going to go all the way down to verse 18 so you can understand the Daniel 11 and 12 shatter process as a preparatory of the coming of the Messiah and his war against pride and sin. This is the NIV version. It gives you kind of a little different nuancing of the Hebrew. Hebrew is very robust, but Isaiah 8, 9 through 18 says, raise up a war cry, a great loud cry, the three angels' message, the proclamation of the soon return of the Messiah, right? And what is the admonition, you nations? Be shattered. Listen, all you distant lands, prepare for battle and be shattered. Sanctification, Kodesh, broken. Fall upon the rock and be shattered. I should have brought up that Matthew 21 thing where it says, be shattered. Fall upon that rock, but woe to those in whom that rock is fallen, and you shall be crushed to powder. Prepare for battle and be shattered over and over and over again. God is not wanting you to lose or to dismiss or to minimize or to tokenize the admonition to accept the shattering process of Job, of Tet, being brought to that clay spot, to the belly of the whale, to the place of Job, to the lamentation, to the destruction of all things, put into the cave where the stone is rolled in front, to be a sealed garden where they roll the stone over the fountain, whatever vision that you want to think, that the irony of that stuck spot is your seal, is your sanctuary. It is ironic, but that's your seal. Now, verse 10 says in Isaiah 8, that's giving us this vision. You see Isaiah 6 as you see the great mediation of the high priest, and then we're moving to 7 and 8 in Isaiah. Read it all in context. Devise your strategy, but it will be thwarted. Hey, you could go and look at all these ways to be pain avoidant, and then somehow buffer yourself from the circumstances by being a prepper or a survivalist, or some ways that you think, no, I'll just survive in the wilderness. I'll go through my own process. I don't want God to put his hands on me. I don't want to be taken to these deep, dark places. And we think that we're going to devise a strategy, but he says it will be thwarted. Believe me, my words that I speak to will be fulfilled. Don't be discouraged. You can be discouraged. Don't be despondent. You could be disappointed, but don't give yourself over to despondency where you just give up. It's disappointing, but don't give up. Propose your plan, but it will not stand, for God is with us. Satan is going to try, when you are brought into this castle of despair of Pilgrim's Progress, you will be tempted to just not want to live anymore. But God says, hey, no weapon formed against you is going to prosper. This is what the Lord says to me with his strong hand upon me, warning me not to follow the way of the people. The way of the people is pain avoidant. The way of the people is delusional, kind of susceptible. See, we've used this kind of narratives of grandiosity and self-importance and all the stuff that keep us into this kind of insulated, self-protective kind of image worshiping state, image management, you know, the false self that we protect so virulently. But God says, be shattered. Let the image of you be shattered. Let the ego image of you be shattered. Let your expectations of self-comfort and of delicacy be shattered, of fancifulness that everything has to conform and be customized to you. Let all of that be shattered. No tyrant is a greater tyrant than the infant child that has been basically fed all of their fantasies and their dreams and told that they can have those just by tantruming into an entitlement kind of, vortex. That somehow they're entitled to what they want, when they want it, how they want it, according to their fancifulness. No one is more evil than that delusional child. No one is more cruel and unreasonable and will not listen to reason nor logic. Do not call conspiracy everything that this people calls conspiracy. Now we think this means don't believe any conspiracy theories. Don't talk about that. It means confederacy. Don't join to people. In other words, you're seeing people find a way to manage and to cope, and you're thinking, well, there's safety in numbers. That's what this means. Conspiracy means you're joining people thinking, well, they're doing this and they're not having to go into this terrible process that other people are going through, where God is really tearing them down and bringing them into Jonah and Job. I want to join myself to these people. I don't want to have to go in that ark, that smelly ark with all those smelly animals. I am seeing that they're making provisions to survive this thing, and he's saying, don't join to them. God is going to bring you through an inevitable process that he's wanting you to accept, Do not fear what they fear and do not dread it, because they are being motivated by their anxiety and their fear that everything they're holding on to is going to be destroyed. Their idols, their apparent riches, their false security, all these things. And it says, don't be caught away with their fears, because fear is very contagious. And it looks like that they are thwarting, or they are successfully evading God's humbling process. And you don't want to go down that path. You don't want to be joined up with them. That's the conspiracy. You don't want to be joined up with that crowd with this false sense of security. God is going to ordain a shattering, a breaking, a humility. Don't dread it. The Almighty is the one that you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear, and he is the one that you are to dread. Focus, your focal point, your reference point is God. Fear God, dread God, not people, not your circumstances, not these things that are passing away. Somebody that really needs to hear this. All of us need to hear this. Verse 14 says, and he will be a holy place. He is our sanctuary. We hide, abide, and reside in the perfection that Christ is. Our assurance is who he is. And we, quote, spiritually, covenantally hide in Christ, in the sense of, God, please don't look at me. See me as a little hen, or excuse me, as a chick hidden under the wings of the hen. See me as I am in Christ. He is a holy place. He's our sanctuary for both Israel and Judah, the north and the south, those that are coming out of the north, those coming out of the south. And he will be a stone that causes the people to stumble, a rock that makes them fall. Why does this make anyone fall? Why is it an offense? Why is it a trap? Why is it a snare? Because there are people that just wishes to avoid resting in somebody else's righteousness other than their prowess, their caprice, their manipulation, their ability to impose their will. We, by nature, are control freaks. And we worship, just like in the book of Habakkuk, we worship our nets. We worship the way that we know how to capture, to pursue, to hunt. I mean, we're celebrating it. It's all through the hip hop community. It's all through the corporate company. It's all through the political class. It's all through the arrogance that you see in the college and the universities. It's all through this world. The spirit of this world is worship how you can manipulate. Maybe through confidence or arrogance, or maybe by being the ultimate victim in the victim Olympics, or I don't know how, but there are different ways in which we worship our ways in which we can control the outcome of something. And there is a plethora. There is an entire cornucopia. There is a very, very vast kind of swath of shades and colors and hues and styles and flavors that we can use to do that. But either way, God's got to get down to that. If he does it, it will ruin us. So he says, well, whoops, what just happened here? If he doesn't get down to this, if he doesn't get past these weaselly, greedy, ratty little Gollum fingers of precious kind of miserliness, in which we found a way to sneak our stolen bread, to feed our holy of holies on our soul, it'll destroy us. And for the people of Jerusalem, it'll be a trap and a snare. How? How I just described. Not giving up your own righteousness. And your righteousness has to do with the worship of the way of how we grasp, control, image manage, twist, spin doctoring, getting the admiration, whatever it is, you guys. I mean, I'll be here all night describing just the myriad ways in which we just play these kind of delusional, we make ourselves dizzy. We hypnotize ourselves with all the ways in which we do our wizardry, our witchy little ways. We are really a part of the witchcraft. We are self-enchanted, folks. And it takes God to get us past it. I mean, we're so infused, so inundated with it. We don't even know how to get past it ourselves. We're too impressed with ourselves that we can't really get rid of that. So many of them will stumble and they will fall and be broken and they'll be snared and captured because it will fall upon them. Christ's kingdom will smash the kingdom of the weasels, of the worms, and of the creepy crawlies, and of the creepy things. The serpent kingdom will be crushed. Bind up this testimony of warning and seal up God's instruction, his law amongst his disciples. Hear this message, come under his dominion, be his child, rest in him, be adopted, be born again, and stand as a child of God, as Christ is your heavenly high priest, elder brother, and mediator. Not impossible. This is not an impossible thing. We're not talking about impossibilities here. Humility is not an impossible thing. It is for the flesh, but God is greater than our flesh. All things with God are possible. But what has he got to do? Because he still has to elicit our free will. He's not going to do maestro, magical, mystical presto. There's no abracadabra to this thing. He will have to engage our willfulness, just like he was trying to engage the willfulness of Adam and Eve to saying no to the serpent, saying no however many times until they're sealed from the temptation of the serpent. They got to say no however many times until literally there's no appeal. But you're exercising free will at every step. Is this helpful? I don't know why, but there's no more comments. So hopefully you guys are still watching. Verse 17 says, I will wait for the Lord. Here are the patience of the saints. This is the idea that if you're stuck in Tet, in Psalms chapter 40, where it says, I'm the horrible pit, the miry clay, I wait for the Lord. At some point, you're stuck there. You know how you have this whole thing with Hannibal Lecter and the crazy cowboy guy, and he's lowering stuff, and you're stuck in the pit, and he's telling you to put lotion on yourself. That's what Satan wants you to feel like, that you're basically going to be skinned. But God says, no, I've shed my skin to cover you in my skin. The reality is that you're going to feel claustrophobic when you're stuck. We're used to giving ourselves 1,000 different options, 1,000 different means out of something. We hit the eject button all the time in our life. We punch out before the process is finished all the time. It's going to be very difficult to not wiggle ourselves out of the process and to not be patient with the Lord, to literally freak out and say, I'll take whatever is handed to me by Satan because I don't want to go through this process anymore. When I was going through the hyperbaric chamber today, and it's an hour that I'm in there, and I started having a really bad earache because they take you down and there's a lot of pressure in the hyperbaric chamber. And so when I was down there, all of my claustrophobia, all of my sense of being stuck, all this kind of fears of feeling like I'm in a coffin, all these kind of freaky things were happening. And I was this close from pressing the panic button over and over and over. And I said, this is practice. This is mental practice. This is emotional, mental control of my internal freak out dialogue in which I don't want to wait. I don't want to be patient. I don't want to submit myself to the process. And I have got to stop freaking myself out that I'm going to die in there. It's important to understand that we mentally wiggle ourselves out of the hand of God all the time when we're actually safe there. I was safe in the hyperbaric chamber, but I started freaking out as if I'm not safe. It became a tomb when it should be a healing womb for me. And I was freaking out because I was getting an earache on the way to the most pressurized thing. And then when they're depressurizing, I was having this really bad earache and I started to freak out. And I'm thinking, you're not going to die, Dave. You're not going to die, Dave. You're just submit to the process. You're going to need all this process for healing in this hyperbaric chamber. That's just a whirly illustration of kind of how we've got to manage our racing, anxious thoughts, thinking God's going to kill me, God's going to kill me, God's going to kill me. Trust the Lord. Trust the process, right? Who is doing what? He's hiding his face from the descendants of Jacob. God is hiding his face when he's now closing the lid, Tet. and we're stuck in the jar. We're stuck at the bottom of the pit. We're in the cave, and he rolls the stone. What? He hides himself. Now it's Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. The ultimate despair has God abandoned me. And I know, as a counselor, as a therapist, that every single person I know suffers from the terror of being abandoned, of being rejected, of being overlooked and neglected, unseen, unheard, and feeling like you've been cast away. God gets down to the gall and the bile of that. So I'll put my trust in him. That's victory. That's overcoming by the blood of the Lamb. That's overcoming Satan's temptation. That's the roaring, lying, seeking, in whom he can devour through his words, through his mouth. This is Satan coming in the beast, the false prophet, the image of the beast, the mark of the beast, the number of the name, and everything that he offers you, security, citizenship in Babylon. And Satan is always looking to jump in and say, you don't have to go through this process. It's unnecessary. I'll put my trust in him. Verse 18 says, here am I, the children of the Lord that has given me. We are signs and symbols. How are we? Our faith. We are on display. We are spectacles for this world to have faith in God, faith and trust in him. When even our persecutors, our prosecutors, those that are literally throwing us into a crisis in which they're all going to tell us this is not necessary. Why would you trust God when we hold life, the power of life and the power of death, like Pontius Pilate said to Christ? And we have to have it in our mind that you would have no power unless God gave you this power. And it's for my sanctification, for my readiness, for the perfection of my soul. You have no power save the power that God grants you to be as a sanctifying instrument for my own soul. And that is how we are a sign and a symbol, that we are the sons and daughters and submitted and trust and are held down by our faith and trust in God. We abide, hide, and reside in him, whatever the storm is. We don't move to a different foundation, different rock. So in Israel, from the Lord Almighty, right, the mighty breasted one who dwells on Mount Zion. I'm going to end there. But what's fascinating is what I was going to do. I'm not going to do it because it's already 2 hours and 17 minutes. Hold on, let's see why. There we go. I was going to show you this whole study that I put together. The very how we're going to kind of end this study was on this. But there's no way, you see. It's too much to go through. Is the delicacies. And I'll show you what it is a little bit. But remember that in Revelation 18, it says, come out of her, my people. And what happened is that, quote, we lived in luxury with her, weep and wail, right? And the fruit of which your soul longed for is gone from you. All of your delicacies and your splendors are lost to you. Now, what I did and not going to be able to do is, what are these delicacies, right? It's the idea of, it's the word mammon, or that which is pleasant or comforting, which has been customized for you. What you've demanded is what you've gotten, what you get. And that's what Satan does. He customizes things for us, and it feels like love. And it's a parallel to what Shulamite goes through with Solomon, and he gives her the essence of what her soul is longing for. It's an eminent thing. It means that it's for sure, but she's able to deal with the process of delayed gratification. And it brings her through a self-examination, a night of terror and examination, a darkness in which she goes through that, but she holds on to him as if it's an eminent thing, like he will give it. And whatever process she has to go through to be in preparation to receive it, she accepts, even though it's bringing her great personal pain and suffering. Now, what Satan does, he gives us premature, He jumps in so we don't suffer the process like Christ in the wilderness. Hey, you don't have to go through all this. And so it feeds our entitlement. I shouldn't have to go through this. I'm a precious person. I'm wonderful. I'm delicate. I am so fragile. I need this. I demand this. I should have it this way. And Satan comes and says, oh, really? I mean, I think you should have that too. Hi, I'm Absalom, and I'm going to speed up the process for you. I'm going to expedite your whole process for you. And we take the hand of that. And it turns us into, this is what that study goes through. I'm just going to just give you an overall idea. And maybe I'll do it on the David Leone channel. If you want to go to that, and I'll just do the delicacies study. I'll just make it about delicacies, but it fattens us up for the slaughter. It turns us into the rapacious children that persecute the people of God. The quote picture of Isaiah chapter 3 and Proverbs chapter 30 and 2 Timothy 4 and all that stuff. We become these arrogant, hateful children that are never satisfied, that are going to be as Jovans, these entitled little kings and queens that rule things, and we're going to persecute our wise, humble, pathetic parents. And the saints are considered these mothers and fathers, these noble ones. And they're being torn to pieces by these knife, sword, mouth, arrogant, entitled, I should have what I want, when I want it, how I want it, in kind of a mentality in which they become the ultimate tyrant. And they have no empathy, no sympathy. They are vicious. They are without pity. They don't care until after they've destroyed the golden goose, where they got everything from, like good little communist Jovan, where they have to destroy everything that gave them the luxuries. And they said, oh, it's like what happened in South Africa, how that government destroyed all the farmers that created all that prosperity, took the farms, and they couldn't run the farms. Oops, that's a Jovan. That's a novice. That's a young person. The Bible says, don't exalt a Jovan, a young person, a novice, because they're going to fall into the same condemnation as Satan. See, that's what that study is going to be talking about. That's delicacies. Those are things made how you want it, the way you want it, perfectly how you want it, and the timing you want it, and the flavor. This much, this ingredient perfectly this way, this much salt, this much vanilla, this much sugar, this much, whatever. It's exactly how you want it, when you want it, and the way you want it. And it actually turns you into a devil, into a demon. It's the Sodom and Gomorrah kind of a thing where everything's perfect. It's Babylon. Everything is perfect. It's the Garden of Eden. And then if sin is in the Garden of Eden, just like you get a kind of a semi-Garden of Eden state of the world before the flood, wickedness just goes crazy and out of control. And to not receive a life of disappointment, of when God brings us into bitter waters or tries us or tests us or disappoints us or whatever he does to bring us to a place of trust, halting, abiding, self-doubt, putting ourselves into the care of God, distrusting ourselves, trusting him, delayed gratification. The greatest tyrants in the world you will ever create is children that never have to delay their gratification. They will show you the raging tyrant that they are and that you will become. God must crush our prescriptions. He must disappoint us. He does tell us and admonish us to continue to trust him, to even trust the discipline and disappointment and the delays, because they're apparent, because what he has promised us is imminent. It's imminent. And whatever he has ordained in that process is for our our good. This is important to understand. Even if it feels like he's trapped us, he blessed Jonah. Even though it feels like that he's punishing us, he blessed Job. Even though it looks like that he has brought us into a desolation, he blessed Elisha. It goes on and on and on, all the way, and ultimately Christ. It appeared that God had put him to the hands of a bunch of knuckleheads that refused to acknowledge his divine rights and then condemned, mocked everything, murdered him. And they were so happy to hear that God may have forsaken him. They couldn't believe how fortunate they were. And yet his reward was imminent. He was sinless. All inheritance was given to him. He rises from the grave. He receives the inheritance, and he's coming back to give of his inheritance that he's imputed to his bride through the judgment of Daniel chapter 7, you will see he will come with his reward. Because we were able to wait patiently and trust the process, God has got to deal with the Saul, the raging tyrant, the Nebuchadnezzar, the Cain, the Ham, the Lamech, the Pharaoh, the Lucifer in all of us that we don't understand. That little entitled, impulsive, prescriptive child tyrant does not need to get their way. It is the seed of rebellion that created the unraveling of a nightmare that God will never allow again, never tolerate again. So it's important that we submit to that process. Okay, I will do the delicacies study on the David Leon channel. It'll probably be about an hour, hour and a half. I won't do it right now. I'm going to get some rest. But anyway, pray for me, pray for one another. We're headed for a very interesting process. It very much is the birthing pains and the shaking and the sifting and the shattering process that is now being delivered and proclaimed to God's people. And we are to say, okay, God, gird up my mind, get me steady for this process, bring me into an acceptance of Job, of Jonah, of Peter, whatever the mortification process is. God, bring about the results that you would wish, that I could be as a living epistle and a testimony, a display of those who trust you. Whatever apparently it is that we trust in the hidden man, and we believe that God is who he says he is, even though on appearance it looks like God may have forsaken us or abandoned us, but we are for signs and wonders. We trust God at core. And this will vindicate his name. That God does not abandon, nor does he forsake, but he does that which is for our best interest. All right, everyone, thanks for being a part of this teaching. Let's keep each other in prayer, and God bless.